We are going to talk about the midterms. The way I wanted to structure this discussion is to introduce some topics for debate. The first one is really a statement about what issues determined these midterms elections, what was important for voters. What I wrote down is, we'll have it projected here, it's the public sector, stupid. This was a story you heard, that people campaigning on healthcare, education, that this was one of the main topics for voters. Would you agree with that? I'll let you. Yeah.
So, I think we've been traveling around the last few days, having similar conversations, and to start the week, this was a lot of what I talked about. But listening to the people that we've had the opportunity to interact with, it kind of reiterated something that I've been thinking back in the States, and I think in many ways low voter turnout shows, is that a lot of these stump issues that candidates have been really pushing in the rhetoric, not just in the 2018 campaign, but in 2016 and onward, is this idea that these are the issues that we need to focus on. But what you're seeing with Americans through and through, and you see it in a lot of the social movements that are going on, whether it's the Me Too movement, whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement, and all of these other ingenious movements, even the ones surrounding gun control in the states, is that people are concerned about things that go a lot deeper than, let's just say, Medicare for all. You know, at the end of the day, these are very easy for candidates to talk about because we've been talking about them for generations. Has a lot of things been fixed surrounding them? I don't think so. But as you look to the modern American, as I'll call them, there's a lot bigger issues going on. What is net neutrality going to look like? How are we going to hone in innovation where we're seeing companies like Uber and Facebook and Google just kind of running away with things? These are the things that real Americans are asking the question. All of these things are cool. They are important. But when are we going to talk about these things that are coming up that nobody seems to want to discuss?
The number one issue in the election overwhelmingly was health care. There was no other issue that was close. And the Republicans, quite frankly, mishandled it. That they wanted so desperately to repeal Obamacare. When they wanted to do it, there was it was close to a majority who supported either repeal or replace and repair. That has changed over the last 2 years. And in fact, when Donald Trump was elected president, 25% of Americans thought that Obamacare should be expanded. Today, that's up to 35%. That when President Trump was elected in 2016, 48% of Americans thought that Washington, that government should be the major player in delivering health care, and today it's up to 58%. That over the last 2 years, the GOP has really lost the debate on health care, and one of the reasons why is that they are seen as owning it now. The previous president, made 3 promises, and tell me if this is too much detail. First promise was that you could keep your health care if you wanted to. And there were over 12 million people who lost their doctor, their hospital, or their plan. I'm one of them, by the way. And I don't read my mail because I live in a couple places. I had no idea that for 3 months I had no health care. They had sent me a note and sent me a second note and sent me a third note saying, you have lost it, USAA. I always say USAA because I don't know where this is going, but I hate USAA, and I want to punish them for denying me health care. And so for 3 months, if something had happened to me, I'd be in trouble. Number 2 was that health care, the costs would go down. And you know what? It did go down for 15% of America. For 70%, it went up. And the third is it'd be easy, be simple. He promised. I don't know if any of you ever tried to look at the healthcare enrollment website. I'm not an idiot. I have a DPhil from Oxford. I could not operate it. I tried several times, I got kicked out, and I gave up. Those are 3 important promises, and they weren't kept. That's why the public wanted the change. But then when the Republicans started to deal with it and the public saw what the GOP alternative was, they didn't like that either. And after 2 years, if you touch it, if you hold it, if you break it, you are considered owner, even if it wasn't your idea in the first place. And that's the major reason why Democrats won the House in 2018.
Does that mean that, because we always we're used to thinking of America as a country where universal health care is distrusted in a way, is this changing in general?
It is changing significantly, and unless the Republicans come up, as I spill, I guess I really do have a drinking problem. Jeez, you know what? It was perfect for him. This pitcher of water is anti-conservative. If the Republicans don't come up with a better answer for it, because the American people want, they believe now that health care is a right, not a privilege. The country is changing ideologically. They still don't want government control. They still don't want government making the decisions, but they don't want it to leave it to the private sector either. And I think the GOP has to get its act together on that.
But when you look at Democrats, to be completely honest, when you see how well they did in the House, was there really a comprehensive plan as it pertained to health care? No. Look at Ocasio-Cortez. The stump speech here was, I'm going to do universal health care. There wasn't how you're going to do that. It was saying Wall Street's going to pay for it. It was essentially Bernie Sanders reinvented in 2018. This idea that Americans, again, it's just going back, we're hearing the same points and the same stumps over and over again every election. When you ask most Americans, I work in these communities. I live in these communities. And for a lot of the people living in these underserved communities, we do have universal health care. It might not be classified that way, but you can walk into an emergency room and not pay your bill every single time, and that costs taxpayers money. But people know this in communities.
And that's why Donald Trump got elected in 2016, because he didn't sound like any other candidate ever. I met him. I had a chance to talk to him on election night. I got to watch the results with him, and I wanted to know what the J in Donald J. Trump stood for. You know what he told me? Genius. That's my one joke. There won't be any more after that one.
So basically, what both of you are saying universal health care is getting more popular even among Republicans. You're saying it exists in a way.
I'm saying universal everything. Free stuff in general is what Americans are looking at. And a lot of that has to compare to be honest, European countries, where you saw like this idea of everybody will go to college for free, universal minimum wage, universal health care. We're going to pay a stipend out to everyone in the country. We might have free housing for everybody. That's enticing for anyone. I don't care who you are.
And that is why Donald Trump won, because Donald Trump said enough of this. And nobody was saying that, and no one said it the way that he said it. Whether you liked him or not, and he had a 38% approval rating on election day, the lowest of anyone who's ever been elected president. The reason why he won is that Hillary Clinton had a 40% approval rating, was only 2 points higher. The people listen to I know you want to do another question, but they'll appreciate this. I have to tell you, of all the attributes that matter to the public now, authenticity is probably in the top two. The idea that someone says what they mean and means what they say, someone who means what they say and does what they say, it really matters to people. And the reason why, even if you don't like him, don't dismiss him, is that many of the things that he promised before Election Day, he is delivering right now. He may be saying it in a way that people don't want to hear, but, and I know you're cringing, but that's why he has a 45% job approval rating after he's picked fights with everyone, because he made a commitment on these issues and he is delivering. And one last point, the economy has not been better in America in probably 40 years. More people are at work. The unemployment rate for various segments who've been hurt in the past has been dropping considerably. The growth rate, which I hate to measure, but it's at 3.5 or 4%. The economy in America is rocking right now, and that's good for a re-election in a couple of years.
Some of that is anticipation.
Now, some of that's Barack Obama. I agree. Some of it is Barack Obama, and some of it is Donald Trump. And I don't understand why Trump doesn't recognize it, and I don't understand why the Democrats don't give Trump some credit for something. We'd be a lot better off as a society if we could acknowledge that we all make mistakes, we all have successes, that we're all involved in this, and if we go to hell, we're going to hell together.
You just mentioned that authenticity seems to be more important than whatever particular issue is on the table. Is that what you're saying? Is that what connects somebody like Beto O'Rourke with Donald Trump, that they both seem to channel something that...
So I have a really bad back, but I'm going to do this anyway. Beto O'Rourke never stood behind a podium. He did what I'm doing here right now, and I'm basically screwing with the camera guy. So I'm going to make it really hard on him. I'm going to go kind of down here. So Beto got into the audience. Beto is, I've seen Bobby Kennedy's speeches, and I urge you, and I'm going to give you several assignments when you go home. And one of them is to see, hello. One of them is to, I'd say to him, get my better side, but there's so much side to get. Go look at Bobby Kennedy in 1968 because he's incredible. I've never seen a politician from any country communicate as effectively as he did. And he was, and you saw when he cried, it was sincere. When he was emotional, it was powerful. He went with the coal miners in West Virginia, not just the stuff that he did in Watts in LA or Chicago or New York. It's what he did with the white poor in Appalachia that no politician had done before him, including his brother JFK. And Bobby connected to them, and Beto O'Rourke did exactly the same thing. He was out with people, and he touched them. And unlike Bill Clinton, he didn't touch them back, so it was effective. Now, here's the problem. If you make a commitment to this give and take, and you make a commitment to be positive and proactive, you cannot go negative. In his final debate, which is assignment number 2, look at Beto's final debate. He went after Ted Cruz as viciously as I've seen any other candidate, and it hurt his favorability by 10 points. People had looked up to him and said, this is a different way to do politics. In that final debate, he was no better than any other candidate across the country, and it hurt him. Beto is going to be one of the top 3 candidates for 2020, but he has to learn to be disciplined. Now I try to sit down because my ass really hurts.
Do you agree with this, though? Do we need an authentic candidate that inspires people rather than somebody who has the right statements on different issues?
Yeah, what we're seeing in America is the rise of identity politics, where Americans are showing, not just through their social media posts, but in the voter numbers, that it's not necessarily about policy for them anymore. It's who, you don't have to have a clear solution to solve the problem. Can you at least understand the issue that I'm feeling? And that started, it was really revolutionized in 2008 with Barack Obama, where you saw African Americans come out in large numbers. And many of them, if you ask them, I don't know if you've ever seen those skits on Jimmy Kimmel when he goes out and asks people like the fake news questions. And I guarantee if you had asked a lot of voters in 2008, what policy is it for Barack Obama that really gets you excited? Many of them wouldn't have been able to answer that question. And you saw in 2016 with Trump, it was revolutionized in a way that none of us could have expected, and I don't even think the Republican Party was anticipating, where he got the lower middle class, underserved white voter really amped up and wanting to go out and vote. Where now you saw in the 2018 election across the Democratic side a spectrum of different candidates, where are their policy as strong as their competitors? Not necessarily. But that didn't stop us from nominating one of our first transgender governors. That didn't stop us from winning an election where we had an openly gay governor. We saw 2 Native women. We saw 2 Muslim women. All of these first. Because people said, you know what? All right, things aren't going as hot as I'd like them to, but at least if I have somebody in here that may not necessarily just reflect me racially, but reflects me on a religious spectrum, reflects how I feel on a sexual spectrum, things might get a little bit better for me. What we're seeing is voters become a lot more selfish as the country continues to expand and people are starting to feel left out of this wave. It's not necessarily about policy, but I'm going to put somebody in place that at least understands where I come from. So the hope is that policy will reflect how I'm feeling.
But I have a warning for you, which is that identity politics may work in elections. I'm going to tell you where it doesn't, but it may work in elections, but it does not work in governing. And if you promote identity politics, if you're there because of your gender or your race or your age or something that is demographic, you have a very grave danger, and I've seen it here, I've seen it in Britain, a danger of pulling the country apart and no way to pull it back together again. If we're talking about ideas and issues, we have a place to go. If we're talking about how we look, we have no place to go. And by the way, the Democrats should have won the Florida governor's race and the Georgia governor's race. There was 2 strong Democratic candidates. I know I'm getting specific. In fact, I may be getting too specific for you. They were African-American candidates, and they were better than their Republican opponents, and I will acknowledge that. but they ran campaigns that were specifically racially oriented because they wanted to bring out every black voter possible, and that alienated white voters that might have voted for them in the suburbs because they just did not want to vote for someone simply because of their race. They needed, bless you, they needed something more than that. So identity politics can work, but you may not want the result in the end.
I sense some sort of an ambiguity with you about that.
Well, if you look at it, when you look at the Georgia race and the Florida race, I think a little bit, something different happened there. The strategy was sound across the board for Democratic candidates. But in many ways, and we even saw it in the Hillary Clinton campaign, Democrats do a great job of making you think that their candidates have already won the race. And we saw that through and through, especially in Georgia and Florida, where you couldn't have told me that those candidates were going to lost. You couldn't have told me in 2016 that Clinton would have lost. And that's one of the reasons why she didn't visit places like Michigan. And she came really late to the Rust Belt states because she thought she had it in the bag the same way we saw in Florida and Georgia. What the Democratic leadership has to do is stop taking voters for granted. And that's across the board. Like in the Sanders campaign, there was no place in this country that we weren't willing to touch. Because at the end of the day, we were the underdog, so we had to. But as we look to the 2020 election, that we can't assume that because Donald Trump is done everything he's done and tweeted everything he's tweeted, whatever candidate that we put out there is going to go ahead and just take the cake, because that's not the case. 2016, Donald Trump won on rhetoric. 2020, Donald Trump is winning on a track record.
In an off-year election, you can vote against someone because it's not the President of the United States. In a presidential election, you have to give them a reason to vote for you. Hillary Clinton ran her campaign in the last 2 months against Donald Trump. It was about 97% negative. Now, Donald Trump was about 90% negative. He himself was about 100% negative. But you have to give people a reason to vote for you. And I'll give you the best example because this comes from the convention. Hillary Clinton's slogan was, "I'm with her." You are with, and this is on all the bumper stickers, and Trump talked about it at the convention. The people are with her. Trump says that's backwards. And then he says, I, Donald Trump, are with you, and I will be your voice. Hillary Clinton was the most qualified candidate to run for president since the late George Herbert Walker Bush 40 years ago. She was unsuccessful because it was about her rather than the people she wished to represent. And when she called Trump voters deplorable, boy, did that make a lot of people angry. It was a foolish thing to do. Don't insult the people you need to win. It's okay to do it with your opponent. It's not okay to do it with your opponent's supporters.
Do you think there's going to be a Democratic candidate who is going to be able to challenge Trump?
The party will hate me for it, but no, I don't. I think you're going to see the same thing that you saw on the Republican side that cleared the path for Trump to get nominated in 2016. The same thing's going to happen on the Democratic side. At this point, we have everybody and their mother saying that they're running for president in 2020, from our establishment candidates, everybody's vying for an Elizabeth Warren, to people that are coming out of the woodworks. My favorite guy in the race right now is a guy named Howard Schultz. He'll announce soon, I'm assuming. And then there's the fear also that a guy like Bernie Sanders still feels an obligation to run again. Will he run as a Democrat or an independent? Regardless of what he does, he already has an established base, and he's going to draw certain votes. So do I think that we have a real chance on the Democratic side? Not really, especially now, as I said, Donald Trump, he's not just running on rhetoric. What is going to happen in 2020 is people are going to see that despite all these mean tweets and racial slurs and everything else that Donald Trump has done, he's actually been a pretty effective president. And that's tough. I'm looking for the lightning to strike me like right now to say that out loud.
You're in church, you're safe.
I'm saying that. But the thing is that he has been a very effective president. Love him or hate him, everything that he said during his campaign in 2016, if he hasn't accomplished it, he's at least tried. You know, the border wall isn't up, but they got a few pieces.
So, looking at these midterm elections, what do they tell us for a Democratic candidate willing to challenge Trump? What does he or she have to do?
Well, that's a good question. Well, Trump apparently can do anything, including shoot somebody in the middle of the street and win. So, but for a
He
Democrat,
didn't actually do it. He just said he could do it.
he did a lot of other things.
I want to talk briefly about the Republican Party. We've been talking about the Democratic challengers to Trump. Does Trump own the Republican Party now after these midterms?
He owns it completely. That virtually every candidate, virtually, not every, but virtually every candidate he endorsed won their Republican primaries. Now, a lot of them were defeated in the general election. He doesn't talk about that. But Donald Trump has a higher level of support among registered Republicans than any presidential candidate with their political presidents with their political parties since Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. And so there is no demand for anyone to run against him. If someone does in Iowa, New Hampshire, they'll be lucky to get 10% of the vote.
Is he going to get all the enthusiasm from Republican voters, though, that are, they are sometimes called the Romney-Clinton voters, who used to vote for Romney and then went over to Clinton?
Have you been to a Trump rally?
Now, I know his supporters are fired up, but...
My offer through the embassy, we have to figure out how to do this, but my offer for some of you, if we can figure out, is to take you to a Trump rally so you can see what it's really like. The cameras, where they put the cameras, you don't actually see it, and they editorialize it. And you need to watch the people who get in line 8 hours ahead of time, and they are polite, and they are excited, and what's really interesting is a lot of parents bring their kids. And I don't mean the kids who are 18, 19, 20. A lot of parents bring their kids who are 10 or 12 years old because they want to teach them about politics, about democracy. And they line up orderly, and there's no brawls, there's no hassle, there's no people pushing and shoving, and they'll line up for a quarter of a mile, which is why you get these 10,000, 15, even 20,000 people rallies. There's something to be said for that.